Alrighty, now to figure out. Now I understand how people feel about sharing their screen. Ugh. Okay. There we go. Application, desktop. Share your entire screen. Okay. And I'm using my notebook. I apologize, guys. View, slideshow. Is it working, Shelley? Shelley?
Nope.
No, okay. Oh, you got to be serious on what you're doing. Okay, so here we go. View, slideshow. How's that?
There you go.
Yay. Alrighty, so if I start talking too fast or anything, please let me know. My name's Jennifer Carriveau. I'm the Vice President of the Minnesota Cottage Food Producers Association, which I think most of you all know that after a day and a half of great sessions. Hopefully I can live up to other people, but we'll find out. So we get a lot of questions on labeling on our Facebook page. And I know there's a majority of people that are tier 1 producers, and it is covered in the training. I want to make a little plug for tier 2 training. Even if you're a tier 1 cottage food producer, I would highly recommend it because you get a lot of great information and more details. So I'm going to do my best. And I do have links for that tier 2 training at the end of this presentation. So what are our cottage food labeling requirements in Minnesota? So each product that we sell, what the law says is each container of the product sold or offered for sale under this clause needs to be accurately labeled to provide the name and the registration number or address of the individual who processed and canned the goods, the date on which the goods were processed and canned, ingredients and any possible allergens, along with the statement that these products are homemade and not subject to state inspection. So that's actually what the law reads. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture does provide guidance on what we need to put on our product labeling. And now, moving forward, I know they updated their website the middle of December, and we have 3 choices as far as the name goes. If you're a sole proprietor, that means you are just doing business as your name. You have not filed with the Minnesota Secretary of State. You're going to use your name. If you decided that you're going to do business as another name and you've filed with the Secretary of State for a DBA, you're going to be using that name. And then if you decided to incorporate your business, so yesterday Kirsten Libby was speaking and she was talking about the different types of incorporations that are available to us. So let's say, for example, you're an LLC, you're going to use that business LLC name. One of the changes to the law that took effect August 1st was we are allowed now to use our registration number by law. The MDA did have a policy previous to that where we could use a PO box, but that's no longer allowed. You need to use your address or your registration number. You can find your registration number on the registration certificate that the MDA mails out. Or Karen or Shelley, would you put the licensing lookup information into the chat group, because your registration number can also be found there. And this way your customer will know how to contact you if they have any questions on the product or, heaven forbid, have a problem with the product. So whoever you sell that product to will know where to find you, because with your registration number, anybody can go to the MDA's website and they can look that up. You also need to include on there the date that the food was made. So the day that you put that product together to package and send out the door, that is the date that you are going to use on that product. And finally, something new to the law this year, we always have to have a card with us if we're selling it that says these products are homemade and not subject to state inspection. But now we actually include that on our label because the intent of the law is to make sure that whoever is purchasing the products, that they're an informed end consumer. You know, they know what the who produced it, where it was produced, when it was produced, and that it was homemade and not subject to state inspection. You're also going to include on there a list of any ingredients that are contained in the product, and this is going to include allergens. So the FDA recognizes the following allergens, and they need to be placed on that label. And so it's milk, eggs, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybean. Note that on January 1st, 2023, sesame seeds are going to be required to be on that list as an allergen as well. So while it's not required today, keep that in mind for 2023. And I do have Suzanne and Greg here. I don't think there'd be any problem on there now listing it, would there? What's your input on that?
Oh, this is Greg. I mean, yeah, the law becomes effect 2023, so a year from now. But I mean, to be proactive, you certainly can add that.
Okay.
You would not be punished or
Yeah.
deemed you would not be deemed or not in compliance. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. And that's one of the things we talk about is the ingredients. The list of the main ingredients is what's required on the product. But if you want to include sub-ingredients as well, highly recommended by the association, because the more information you give your customer, the better they're going to be able to determine whether or not that product's right for them. Okay, so one of the things you need to also make sure is are allergens listed correctly on that label. So some of the things you consider before making your label is you're going to make sure that that allergen statement is no smaller than the ingredient list, and that we use the same wording as the 8 major allergens. So for an example, a product that contains butter, in the contains part for the allergens, you're not going to list butter, you're going to list milk. Okay. Even though the second statement's true, the name of that allergen is milk and not butter. A big one is flour and wheat. You know, we have a lot of, celiacs. That's really a real serious disease and that type of thing. I would think that most people would know that flour is a wheat, but you always want to make sure that you're labeling it correctly according to guidelines and that you're giving the best information out there. So it is required that you use wheat and not flour, milk, not butter. Greg, can I ask you to interject too, because we get a lot of questions on the size of the font. And I know I don't know if we give direction to the size of the font, Suzanne, but it's something about the O and a certain size. Are you familiar with that, Greg?
Well, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, but I'm not familiar with the exact measurement of the size. So all of the food labeling font type requirements can be found in 21 CFR. And I can get that number later, but in there, it'll say minimum size font. And you're right, Jen, it's gonna be based on a certain character.
Yep.
So, and I can't remember, I don't remember off the top of my head what that is.
Well, I just looked down and I forgot that I had written it down. So I apologize.
What is it?
And I just literally looked down. I guess I need to look down once in a while. That the size of the font is at least 1/16 inch in height based on the lowercase o. They also, and then that it's prominent, conspicuous, and easy to read. So.
Yeah, you can't squish your letters together either. They could be properly spaced so it's easy to read. Very good.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I need to look down. Okay.
Well, I was going to say 1/16, but I didn't want to. That was going to be my logical guess, but I'm.
Yep. And all I could remember in my brain was 6. So thank you. Okay, so some of the things you're going to consider before you create your label is if you suspect the consumer may not know what a certain allergen is, because there's two ways you can write it. And you can see I have an example of the case in, and that's with the parentheses, because you can write a label and say it says flour, and you can put in parentheses wheat right along in your ingredients. But if you think that your customer is not going to be able to understand what you're doing, it's better to declare that all the allergens specifically in one area. And that's where the contains milk comes in at the end of your label, which we have examples further on in the PowerPoint. Also, if the product includes like tree nuts or fish or shellfish, you need to specifically state which ingredient of that falls within that category, if that makes sense. So move on to the next page here. So ultimately what matters is that the allergen statement is truthful and not misleading. And I found this through a blog through the FDA, and somebody wrote in here, how do I determine what allergens are in my product? And I thought this was a really good resource. They say, number one, write a list of all the ingredients in your product. Number two, using my ingredients list as a guide, take a photo of the packaging for each ingredient, including the ingredient and nutrition facts, so you can have it as a reference, because often people switch ingredients, like maybe between two brands. So in that case, you take a photo of both brands, and you probably are going to want to do this or double, check it often when you're purchasing new brand or a new product, just in case they've changed the ingredients at all. But I thought that was a great idea, because then you have that list of allergens right there, or excuse me, ingredients and possible allergens. And number three, return to the ingredients list for the product, and next to each list ingredient, write down any allergens that are discovered on the packaging for that ingredient. Because, for example, what is the one? Almond extract. Some almond extract has anchovies in it. For pets, even though they don't have an allergen list and we don't have to write the allergens, cream of tartar may contain grapes. So there's just different ingredients that maybe make up the ingredient you're using in your product, and there could be allergens within that. And this is where it helps to have the photos, of the photos of the packaging labels. And then after reviewing every ingredient, you'll have a list of the ingredients, and you'll also have a list of all of the allergens that appear in the product. So then you just format your label according to the allergens, how you're going to declare the allergens using one of the acceptable formats. Does that make sense to everybody?
I would add too, Jennifer, that looking at where companies' labels have been inaccurate because of allergen information, and you brought up a key point, it's when you're producing a food and you're using a certain brand of ingredients to make the finished product, and then there all of a sudden, it might not be your change, but maybe your supplier changed a source of ingredients on you. It's the same product, but it's from a different company. And sometimes when that label is not reviewed accurately, when that change happens, that's where an allergen is often missed.
Okay, thank you. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Also, so I know on my labels, I also have a may contain statement, and it's truly just to try to limit the liability of it. I have good sanitary practices and that type of thing, so it really shouldn't matter. But according to the FDA, this type of claim is not required, nor is it recommended by the FDA. So what if a food company, they produce their product in a facility that also processes other allergens? It shouldn't matter that other allergens are present in the facility, because proper cleaning and production should prevent any allergen cross contact. But, we always worry about cross contamination. So that may contains statement, it's a tool to limit that business liability for any allergens that show up in your product. But don't rely on this type of may contain statement as a claim to compensate for bad food processing practices, because we are responsible for that. While it may stop someone with a food allergy from eating your product, it will not mean that the food business is exempt from that liabilities related to the allergens in the product. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so now you've written your, next you're gonna write your allergen statement based on the information you collected. And remember, your product contains all of the allergens, which are the ingredients that you use, which we've talked about that. And you're going to want to make sure you make a comprehensive list of all ingredients. This includes flavor additives and colors in your product, any allergens they may contain. Inspect the product label again on all the ingredients you produce of your product and write down any allergen claims that are listed. And I know I keep saying that, but it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to list the allergens. And here's that example where I was talking about where you can actually list the allergens in parentheses after the ingredient that contains the allergen. And then moving on to the next slide, here's the listing where it says contains wheat, milk, egg, and soy, and it's listed directly after the ingredients. And remember, keep that font size the same. You don't want it any smaller than the ingredients list.
Jen, do you want to answer a few of the questions first?
Sure.
So what about soy, lecithin, and cooking oil spray?
What about soy? What do you,
Well, in other words, if you're using cooking oil spray, are you going to put cooking oil spray on your ingredients list? A lot of people use cooking oil on their cake pans, for instance, or their cookie sheets.
So what I do is I actually list it in my ingredients, and then I actually list the allergen in my contains part. That's how I do it. Because any ingredient that is in the list, any ingredient that you use to make it has to be in the ingredients list.
Not if it's less than 2% on some things, though.
Pardon me?
So if it's less than 2%, correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, then it's not, it doesn't have to be listed. But like say I fry my donuts in vegetable oil, I always list that they're fried in soybean oil. So I list soy as the allergen.
Yep. And I do believe if it's less than 2%, you do not need to. This is just kind of the, yeah, that was my understanding as well.
But the 2% does not excuse the allergen statement.
Okay.
Okay.
Does not
So
excuse.
if that let, yeah. So if it's less than 2% of the makeup and that product being used at less than 2% has a major food allergen in it, that has to be declared because then you're going to have a reaction, right?
Right.
That makes sense because I know my daughter used to date somebody who had a horrible shellfish and peanut allergy, and they went out for dinner and he ordered something that was supposed to be totally free of shellfish and peanuts, and he had a reaction and he ended up spending, I want to say, I know at least 24 hours in the hospital because of it. He went into anaphylactic shock. So it is very important that we make sure that we list all of those allergens. I guess I always list everything no matter what.
And that's a very good point. So if cooking oil is used to line the pan beforehand, that becomes an ingredient of that food.
Mhm.
And even though it's less than 2%, if it contains an allergen, then that would have to be considered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. That's why I wanted you here.
So
Thank you.
somebody said the ingredients should be listed to the most to the least.
Yep, and we're getting to that.
Okay.
Okay. And again, you do it immediately after whatever that ingredient is that contain, you know, that it's contained in that ingredient, or you do that list at the end, for example, contains wheat, milk, and soy. Okay, so listing the ingredient list on the product label is required to be listed in descending order of predominance, and it is by weight, it is not by volume. So if you're using a half a cup of pumpkin and a half a cup of oil and a half a cup of sugar, they are not all created equal. They all have their own weights, and you need to go by predominance of the weight, not the volume. So listing ingredients in descending order of predominance means that the ingredient that weighs the most is listed first, and then the ingredient that weighs the least is listed last. So here's an example of weights of common ingredients used in baking, and this is just general, okay? So you can kind of look at it. All-purpose flour, 5 ounces of it. I don't know what the brand is 142 grams here. I did print off from King Arthur's website, and I do have a lot of these PDFs, so I can send them to you. But to kind of give you a comparison, your King Arthur all-purpose flour, the same amount is 120 grams. And actually, it's probably a half an ounce more, but it's about 120 grams. So there is a difference. One of the big ones I noticed was, let me get to it. So I put a highlight in it because I was like, wow, brown sugar for King Arthur. Here it says a 7.5 ounces, which is 1 cup in volume, is 213 grams. And where is my thing at? Here for brown sugar, 7 ounces, it's 198 grams. And then another brand, it is 239 grams for the dark brown sugar, and then 219 grams for the light brown sugar. So the weight of it, while it's close, it may be different. And with all the different products we're using in the kitchen, it's probably prudent that you invest in a digital scale and weigh out the ingredients of the products that you're producing. Okay, so what about spices and flavors? How are spices, natural flavors or artificial flavors declared in ingredients list? According to FDA, these may be declared in an ingredients list by either using specific common or usual names, or by using the declaration spices, flavor, natural flavor, artificial flavor. So for example, something that was made with apple slices where they had water and cane syrup and corn syrup in it, modified cornstarch, spices, salt, natural flavor, artificial flavor. Now let's say that they used like an allspice blend, or something that was a blend of multiple spices. Then you need to list each ingredient by name. Same with flavors or colorings. Does that make sense? I hope. And that's one thing. Don't forget about the food coloring. Color additives that are exempt from certification can be listed collectively as artificial colors. Color added or equal informative. But if you have something that you're using that has one of the following dyes in it, then it needs to be listed separately. And you can go to the fda.gov files, that email address down there, and I'll send everybody the PDF, and there's a lot more information on that. So for example, when the electric red food coloring gel from AmeriColor, they actually have a listing for all of their food colorings at the www.americacolorcorp.com allergen information. You can select that and it will tell you if there's nuts in it or gluten, any of that information in there. But additionally, you're going to want to look at the product itself, because for the electric red color, product made in the United States, and these are the ingredients. It says water, sugar, one or more of the US certified colors, blue 1, blue 2, yellow 5, yellow 6, red 3, so on and so forth. And I do know, and I don't, I'm not the expert on that, so I'm going to defer to Greg or Suzanne, but I know from the we have done that the colors potentially have an allergic reaction for some individuals. Oops. And there's some research evidence that children can have adverse behavioral effects from it. So that's something that our customers may want to know. And I'm going to defer to you guys about those certified colors by the FDA for more information on it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. And that's
Okay.
true, Jennifer. I mean, not all colors have to be listed by name, but certain ones are. And I think your reference that you have will identify which ones must be, and it's for the exact same reasons as you mentioned. Some people have a reaction to certain colors, others don't. So considering certain populations have a reaction, maybe the yellow number 5, then boom, it should be listed. And also too, and I think there's another one of the yellow colors too, is it also, when colors are listed, it shows that the product, like if you had egg bread, that if colors added, then the consumer is not misled that, well, that egg is really rich, that's why it's colored yellow. No, really it contains food colorings or dyes. But yeah, certain artificial colors do have to be listed for those exact same reasons.
Yeah, and the reason I brought it up is for humans, but not only dogs, because I went and I was doing some dog treats over the holiday break, and I went and I purchased some powders, some natural powders. When I went to do the brown, it actually had chocolate in it, had cocoa in it. So I'm like, whoop, can't use that. So it just kind of made me think about it even more. And I've always listed when I've had the red dyes and that type of thing in it, but I'm probably going to be a little more careful about it now. Okay, so here's some examples of some labels. Karen Peterson, Confections by Karen, our Facebook guru who answers everybody's questions, was so gracious to share her label with us. So Karen put on here, and she has extra information, which is great. She includes her name, Karen Peterson, Karen K. Peterson, doing business as Karen's Confections. She uses her address in Blooming Prairie instead of her license, or excuse me, her registration number. And then she also includes her phone number. She also includes additional information. So the phone number is additional information that is not required to be on there. But she also puts on there that she is a registered cottage food producer with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and the required statement that these items are homemade and not subject to inspection. She lists what the product is, and you can see that she has the main ingredients with parentheses afterwards of the sub-ingredients. For her flour, she has wheat flour, malted barley flour, sugar, brown sugar with the sugar and molasses, apple cider, butter, milk, eggs, baking powder, salt, cardamom, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Allergens, milk, eggs, wheat, and it's fried in vegetable oil, in parentheses soy, and the date that she made them. I know Karen also sometimes includes on some of her labels that she had sent that I saw where she gives a Best By date on it, which I think is really neat as well. So here's another example of a label. There's nothing, no graphics or anything, so this is pretty plain, but it's just the basic what's required by the Minnesota state law for registered cottage food producers. So you have Sally Baker. Sally Baker could be an individual, or Sally Baker could be a DBA. Her registration number, or his, with the apple cider cake donuts and the date they were made. The ingredients are all on there, and then immediately afterwards contains milk, eggs, wheat, fried in vegetable oil, soy. These items are homemade and not subject to state inspection. That is just a very generic basic. Minnesota cottage food producers, like the FDA guidelines require you to list sub-ingredients too. I know when you're trained, it's highly encouraged to use the sub-ingredients as well. And that's something that the Minnesota Cottage Food Producers Association recommends as well. The more information you can give to the person purchasing your product, the better. But this is just the basics of what is required. Okay, so here's another one. This is for an LLC, Baking in Minnesota, LLC, registration number, the product's name, when it was made, the ingredients, the allergens, and then these items are homemade and not subject to state inspection. And then here's the puppy dog one. Name of who's doing it, registration number, added the phone number in there, doesn't need to be on there, but it's there. The name of the product being produced, the date. Maybe you don't want to put your date in every single time. Maybe you print off labels and you just write your date in there. So when there's a line in that, you would definitely have to write that date in there prior to putting this label onto your product. The ingredients: whole wheat flour, peanut butter, eggs, honey, vegetable oil, sugar, arrowroot, baking powder, beet powder. And that these products are homemade and not subject to state inspection. There is no list of possible allergens because the FDA does not have a list of allergens that need to be required on a label. And here are some resources for product labeling. The MDA's website, they have a great cottage food law guidance area where you have to scroll down and you'll have to select the label, the labeling drop down, and then select the training link on there. The FDA has some great resources as well. The University of Minnesota Extension, the courses, and for that tier 2 course training, that is excellent, and we highly encourage people to take that training. And then also avery.com is on there. I should have also added maybe some links for digital scale as well, because I'd highly encourage you to invest in one so that you can get the weights of those products and each of the recipes that you use, and then you can label your product as accordingly. I know some people will use label makers. Karen, maybe you can talk about that, because don't you have a label maker?
I don't. Amanda Lukey out of Maple Grove has one that I've been looking into getting. I just print, I use Avery 8463 as the label I use, and then the template that coordinates that with that you can find on Avery's website. And then I just save all those documents like that. I save them into Word, and then I can edit them as I need to. They're all saved under each name as say like apple cider cake donuts, and the last date I made them is the date I put in my my file. And then I can easily go edit something if a brand name changes or whatever, and then reprint them. If I'm doing a market, I like to print the dates on them ahead of time, because I found it saves a ton of time if you have all the dates listed already.
Yep. I know for me, I actually use the off-brand labels though, and because they will line up and show you which Avery labels they go with. Otherwise, I will actually sometimes buy these as well. I'll go to Sam's. This is when I'm really desperate.
They're cheaper. They're cheaper on Amazon.
Yeah, I do think with these, I actually found them at the dollar store one time and probably came home with a crate of them because I'm really good at that. Nowhere to put them, but I have them. So, and I am going to, I'm going to pull here and be screen quick if I can again, that website for
you can also create labels on canva.com, and then you can import them into your system and print them out that way.
Exactly. And I know some people will use Shutterfly and different resources as well as that. Some people do use local people to create their labels because they want to make sure they don't bleed and that type of thing. It depends on what you want for your label. Some people print them directly onto paper. The important thing is that you give them to the person so that they are fully informed as to what is in that product. What questions do we have?
Is the date when you put the product into packaging or when you actually finish making the goods? What do you put when you freeze cookies ahead of time, for example?
For me, I've always been advised by MDA that you use the date that you actually take and you assemble the cookies. But when I do something like that, I actually will write a date as to, I'll have like a record on the whatever I'm pulling out of the freezer. So if let's say I have a bunch of cookies that are due 1 week, I produce them on whatever day, I will make sure I have a record of that. So I can say, well, I produced them on this day, they went into the freezer, I pulled them out, I decorated them. Kathy, I see that you're on here. Kathy Brandt, how do you guys train on that? I'm curious.
Suzanne says date you made it.
Date you made it.
Yeah, and I think Suzanne replied in the chat, the date you actually prepared or made the product. And, Jennifer, what you're doing is by adding that, date that you thawed the cookie, That's additional information, which is helpful to the consumer, but it's not, required.
Exactly. It's not required, but that way I just always have everything in case, heaven forbid, something would happen. What other questions do we have, Shelley?
Mostly it's just people trying to figure out where is the best place to buy labels.
If you're going to make them on Avery, the cheapest place, or if you're going to averyontop.com, the least expensive place I've seen them to print them off yourself at home is Sam's and Costco. I've looked on Amazon as well, but it's usually more even with the prime shipping. I know, Tom, are you on this call or not?
It was.
Yes, I am.
Yep. I know you do something a little bit different. Do you want to share with how you print yours off?
Oh, yeah. I just, one second. Let me turn my camera on. I just use my laser printer. So I use avery.com, like Karen was saying. I buy the, I don't remember what the number is. I can go grab them real quickly. But I do the kind of ones that are matte finish, but clear, because I put them on my bread bags. So I kind of want it to be see-through a little bit. And I just print them off on my printer and use Avery. I download them as a PDF, so I have them backed up. I've found that I can get them on Amazon, like 500 packs for pretty cheap compared to going like Office Depot, which I would highly recommend not doing. But
Gotcha.
what I would really want to do though is I want to see if I can find a label printer that prints onto something other than just a white label. I want a label that's clear or matte color, but I haven't been able to find any label printers that have that kind of a label roll that you buy. If anybody knows, I'd love to know.
Yeah, please put that in the chat for anybody. That would be great. Somebody here in the chat put in here, and I'm not a canner, so for canning, it's the same requirements, but this person adds to their salsa, refrigerate after opening. What a great thing to put on there as additional information for somebody, because you want the whole idea behind properly labeling your product is making sure that you meet the minimum guidelines of the law, but responsibly adding anything in addition that you need to put in there so that the customer is informed. That's always been what we've recommended as an association.
If the baking is a two-step process, pie crust made one day, filling made a different day, but baking on a third day, which day is the right day?
That, let's ask Suzanne or Kathy.
I would say the day you baked it.
The day it was baked. Okay.
The day it was baked. Kathy, do you agree?
I know that's what we've always told everybody when they ask on our Facebook page, but since you guys are the experts and we have you here, thought we'd ask.
I'm interested in the previous questions about claiming items as gluten-free and or vegan. Are there any regulations regarding what requirements may exist to make those claims?
You want me to answer that one?
Please.
That, I was just going to ask for you to do that, Greg.
Okay, so I can't answer the vegan one, but the gluten-free one, now that's a defined term within FDA, and that's a federal law. So if you say gluten-free, it has to be gluten-free. And what FDA defines as gluten-free is less than 20 parts per million gluten. And so the reason why it's 20 parts per million of gluten is because there's no analytical test that can detect lower than 20 parts per million. And also from a medical standpoint, at 20 parts per million, most people will not have a reaction, a celiac disease or gluten intolerance or sensitivity, will probably not have a reaction of less than 20 parts per million. So if you're going to use gluten-free, then you must be assured that your product is definitely less than 20 parts per million of gluten. Or it can be 0 too, like water would be gluten-free. That have no gluten in it. But if you're processing something like a cracker and you're using, alternative flours like rice flour and combinations of flours other than wheat or barley or rye or any other hybrid wheat products, then if you use gluten-free, you just got to make sure less than 20 parts per million. Does that answer that question?
That answers that question completely. And I have one that I'm going to make sure we write down, and I'm going to run it by MDA as well, because I'm wondering under the cottage food law if we can claim things such as gluten-free, because there are very specific things that requirements and that type of thing, and just make sure. I know we're exempt, but I just want to make sure that we're in line as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because sometimes federal law, with cottage law, sometimes federal law doesn't. You want to make sure.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Do we need to
one thing
test then? Do we need to test for the ppm of gluten if we claim gluten-free?
Well, let me ask you this. Are you using products that you might have processed in a way to render them gluten-free?
No, I have wheat allergies in my home, so I don't actually cook with any wheat, but it would be an additional step for me that I would have to go out of my way to do, because I am confident that my products don't have any gluten or wheat in them, but I want to be able to safely make the claim that they're gluten-free.
No, you wouldn't need analytical tests to show it. I think, places that use the testing would be, think about big, large manufacturing companies that might have production lines that produce a lot of different products, even though they're producing, it's not it may not be a dedicated facility that's a gluten-free facility. In other words, there's gluten somewhere in the facility, but they might have a dedicated line. And so they might go ahead and put gluten-free on the product, but occasionally they'll do testing to make sure there's no cross-contamination, et cetera, but it's not a requirement that you have analytical data to support it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And go ahead, sorry.
Oh, the only thing, kind of like why, so like if FDA puts on a defined term like gluten-free, so we have the onus to prove that there's gluten in it, so that's not you, but you have to, the producer has to produce a safe food. It's up to the government to show that it's not safe if they have reason to believe it, right? So.
Okay. I just remember with our conversations with something, and one of them was elderberry, when we were having that conversation to make claims about what that product does. I think that there was additional steps that we had to go through, but I'm gonna double check on that.
That's a good segue, because I wanted to mention that too. I think, on the labeling presentation, I like how the Minnesota cottage food law requires the date made, because for the cottage food industry, that in amongst itself serves as kind of like a production date or a code date, right? Oftentimes, not in other states, sometimes that's not a requirement. So cottage food industry folks will make a food, but they don't have any type of way to separate their batches or their production dates. So if they do have to recall something, man, you have to recall everything you made, from the beginning. So having this made on date in Minnesota is a benefit to the industry. That way, if you had a problem with that particular batch or product, you know exactly what day it is, and that the problem may not exist in other batches, right? The other thing is to keep in mind that all labels must be truthful and not misleading. So anytime there's a nutritional claim, a health claim made on a label, then it's up to the person who produced that label to prove it. So if you're making drug claims, that would be a no-no. That would be automatically prohibited. If you're making certain nutritional claims, then often, I'm not sure if this applies to cottage food laws, but other conventional food producers, if they make a nutritional claim, then they have to provide a nutritional facts label to prove, like if you say low in sodium, then that's produce a nutritional facts label to show that it is indeed lower in sodium. Or does that make sense?
Yep, that makes
So go back
total
to your,
sense.
yeah, yeah. So adding claims, medical, nutritional, or health claims, then it's up to the producer or the manufacturer or producer to prove it somehow. And I'm not sure how that relates with Minnesota Ag. So
Suzanne, do you
but
have
definitely
any? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say any medical or cure claims of a disease would be an automatically no, because it makes it an unapproved drug. So.
Fantastic. Suzanne, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, I was talking and muted. I said, we teach that it's better to leave those nutritional claims off and just have that conversation with your, or, you know, especially the health claims as Greg just mentioned, but even those gluten-free, just have that conversation with your customer. I think that's really the nice thing about your, about the cottage food industry is your relationship with your customers.
I agree. Yeah, and then I know, Annie, when you were talking about that before and you create gluten-free products and you're really confident in it because your family is gluten-free, you know, maybe that goes back to the whole way you advertise your business too, that Allison was talking about, and it's part of your story and why you're so passionate about what you do, because you have control in your kitchen, you know what's going into your product and that type of thing. So yeah, that would be one way you can do it.
Can I add something, Jennifer?
Definitely, please do.
So I got a lot of customers that ask for gluten-free bread, and it's really tough to make that kind of bread, you know, that's in an actual safe kitchen when you're making a lot of other stuff from home. But what I started doing is I called it gluten-free friendly bread, and then I made up a label that specifically, it's not the label, it's just the disclaimer that I put on there. And I did a lot of research online, and what I came up with was, it says, although our gluten-free breads are made and cooked using dedicated kitchen utensils and pans, they are prepared in the same facility and ovens as our regular flour-based breads. We cannot guarantee that our breads are 100% free of gluten, as there's always a possibility of trace amounts crossing over from other kitchen areas. And then in bold, I say, please consider this when purchasing these items. And then on top of that, anybody who's asked me for gluten-free bread, I know them all by name. And so not only get this label on there, but I talk to them one-on-one and I ask them, do they have celiac? What's this potential? So I try to do a lot of CYAs with it, but at the same time, make it very clear that it's friendly without making any actual claims.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying.
My lower sodium breads, I don't say low sodium, I say lower sodium. And then I tell them why, because, oh, I cut the sodium in half, but I can't tell you that it's a low sodium product.
Yeah, it's kind of like my neighbor needed a gluten-free cake for her son. I made sure he did not have celiacs or anything like that, because they said, I produce things in my kitchen. She knows me quite well. I scour everything. I remember my daughter brought home her boyfriend from college, and he had the shellfish and the peanut allergy. Not only did I wipe everything down, I threw away like all the nuts or gave them away to people, because I'm like, absolutely not. After hearing about how he was in the hospital, I was a weirdo about it. I went overboard. It was dumb, but my husband just sat there shaking his head. But I'm like, I am not going to be the one that puts that kid in the hospital. Anyway, but we had a conversation, and I made a cake, and it was fine. I didn't claim that it was gluten-free. It was gluten-free, but I didn't claim that I'm a gluten-free kitchen or anything.
Suzanne,
And if I may interject, that's really where the cleaning and the detergents come into play. When you are cleaning, you've got to, you know, like with sanitizing, you're killing the bacteria, right? But for allergens, you're actually removing the allergen from those surfaces. So that's where your soap and detergent really come into play there.
Thank you for that, Suzanne. Somebody else was saying something?
well, when you use flour, the dust stays in the air for a long time. I used to work in a flour and sugar packaging plant. That stuff gets everywhere.
Oh yeah, think about when we make lessa. Seriously, anybody here who makes lessa, Karen? Think about the cloud you have around your head. I mean,
I had
literally,
some,
it's cake.
I had somebody ask me for gluten-free cupcakes the week I was making lefse, and I said, nah, nope, there's no gluten-free coming out of this kitchen or gluten-friendly coming out of this kitchen anytime soon.
And for the disclaimer, the lefse has been tested and it has passed the water activity requirement. Okay, sure thing here. Hey, Tom, are you willing to share your gluten disclaimer with everybody?
He just put it on.
I just put it in the chat and then apologized for the bad formatting.
That's great. And do you want to maybe scan it into a PDF and allow us to use it on the website?
Yeah, absolutely. I already have it in a PDF, so I can just send it to you.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have here since we have both state and federal representatives on? This is a great opportunity because anybody who is on our Facebook page knows there are constant labeling questions that we do our best to answer. Anything that you've read?
I don't have a question, but I have just maybe a PSA. I label like all sub-ingredients. So like chocolate chips or like the cocoa and the milk and all that stuff because I'm lactose intolerant. I'm on low FODMAP diet, which means I can't have garlic or onion and things like that. And so when people label things as spices, I won't touch it because I don't know what the spices are. So I'm a big fan of label all sub-ingredients. Just more information is better in my opinion, even if it's not required.
Yep, I agree. Couple of questions. We touched on the gluten-free. Annie is curious about a vegan health claim. I know, Greg, you said you couldn't speak to that, but Suzanne, do you have any information on that or a direction where she could maybe look?
No, I don't think there's a definition for vegan. And don't believe that that triggers any claims, but let me do some searching. Greg or Kathy, if you have any information on that.
No, I think that's accurate. There's no defined term. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, all labels must be truthful and not misleading, right? So if that's going to be used, then certainly you'd want to make sure that it truly is vegan, of course.
That makes sense.
Thank you guys for answering that question. I question it because I cook vegan, but mostly just because I don't use butter, dairy, or eggs. So it's no dairy or eggs. So I don't want us to claim vegan and not have it be vegan. And then I'm learning that there's a lot more to vegan cooking than just not the animal products, but a lot of sugars are, not vegan and things that you would think of as vegan are not actually vegan. So I just wonder, so that's kind of an honor system then to claim to be vegan and then also do the research to find and source vegan ingredients like sugars and sprinkles.
Yep, until there's a definition.
So the question is there's a question here about powdered buttered milk, and should that be listed as milk? And I would say yes, because it's a dehydrated form of it.
That's correct. It's if it's powdered milk, the protein's still there. So the offending protein would still be there. It's just in a dry form. So yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions? Can everybody, I'm just kind of curious, refined sugars made from sugarcane require both, I can't read.
It says refined sugars are made from sugarcane and it requires bone char to achieve clear white color. Most refined cane sugars are unsuitable for vegans.
Oh, okay, good information. Out of curiosity, does everybody want to put in the chat the size of their labels right now? Because I know sometimes my labels get to be quite large, and I'd be kind of curious to see how large people's labels have gotten.
I use like half of a shipping label.
It would just be interesting to see what everybody's using. While people are doing that, there you go. Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions for anybody? And I will email out those PDFs that I did. I was surprised to see when I was doing this, I looked up like how much cinnamon weighed versus how much baking powder or baking soda weighed and different things. And they do have different weights. So it, you know, some just really trace and stuff like that. But if you're going to be doing it the right way, we need to know that. I'll include, and I think most everybody here's members too, and I'll try to get that on the first page and that type of thing. The ingredient weight charts, if you look, like King Arthur has a very detailed list on their website. It includes volume, ounces, and grams.
Also, when you're weighing ingredients, just because, you know, say the amount of humidity in your house is less. Like right now, the humidity in my house is 16% because we live in houses built a very long time ago, and trying to get it to keep up is hard. So when you weigh flour, say if I weigh flour today and then I weigh it next week when the humidity in my house is 40%, the amounts can be different. So sometimes ingredients can change. What a cup of flour can weigh something different today than it does tomorrow. So just kind of curious when you weigh scale, you know.
If you're packing your sugar versus not packing your sugar, or if you're scooping it or you're spooning it, there's so many different factors, you know.
Yep.
The thing I did leave out though, and I never thought about, because I don't use a lot of them because I don't like them, but our sprinkles and that type of thing too. Really make sure what's in them. And then there are some of those flakes and stuff like that. Everything we're using and that we're putting into our food, we need to make sure they're food safe too. Make sure it's food safe. Make sure it's intended for human consumption, because I know that there are some of those metal flakes out there and sprinkles and different things like that that are not, and we do not want to be using those. Because what we do in our kitchens affects cottage foods in Minnesota, everybody, you know what I mean? It's no different than anybody else. So just make sure we're being responsible about it. Yeah, they're hidden, like Donna said, there's hidden ingredients everywhere. We make sure we know what we're putting in our products.
I was really surprised to see that shellfish is one of the possible allergens on Wilton's food coloring.
Yeah, I think you're the one that told me that, because yeah, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And like I said, I keep talking about the grapes and cream of tartar and Shelly heard it all throughout Christmas. Can you believe there's grapes and cream of tartar? Wow, you know what I mean? But yeah, and just because you took a list off of King Arthur, it doesn't mean that weight is going to be exactly the same for every other product. So we need to do our due diligence, and we need to make sure we are weighing the ingredients that we're putting in. So, but I'll make this stuff available. And it's really interesting to go onto the AmeriColor website, because we use all these different colors. They do have a breakdown for the different colors, and they have allergen statements. They have a lot of different information in there.
So Joe Riley, he can't really talk to us because he's on his phone, but he wrote, I would recommend not to make any claim using the word free, such as gluten-free friendly. This is making a sort of claim that I don't believe will stand up in litigation, only because you are kind of misleading the consumer and sending a mixed message. Sorry.
I would like to say, I did a bunch of research online to try to figure out what to call breads that were made, or products that were made in kitchens that had gluten in them. And I actually found that there seem to be two terms that people use. And this is actually on regular commercial products too. It's either gluten-free friendly or gluten friendly. And I actually found message boards where people argued about which one they preferred better. And I choose to go with gluten-free friendly, because gluten friendly to me seems like more of a head mess. And so I actually contacted all my friends who have celiac and asked them if I were to offer products to them, what would make them feel comfortable. And they all voted for gluten-free friendly. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, but at the same time, I was like, well, yeah, so.
Awesome. You know what I'll do too is I will reach out to Kirsten. She has been an invaluable resource, you guys, for cottages this last couple of years, and I'm sure she'll give us her input. And she's always been straightforward and
From a legal
Yeah.
point of view?
get it
What
from a
if you
legal.
ask, what,
What
yeah,
was
what
that?
if you ask the state of, asking the state of Department of Health if gluten-free friendly is an acceptable term?
Yep.
It's a good idea.
Yep.
From a
Yep.
legal standpoint, I mean, it's one thing, you know, blogs on email and taking surveys, but when it comes down to a federal law that the state then also is in charge of enforcing, asking the state their opinion on what they think.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We'll take one off. Go ahead.
I mean, I could certainly ask. I mean, in my job with FDA, I cannot review labels officially in a capacity. So that's done by our headquarters. But when they review labels in an official capacity, they'd be able to, you know, chime in too. I could even ask one of our label peoples at headquarters of that term, gluten-free friendly, if that's an acceptable or is that a misleading claim, you know. And that might help. I forget the name of the person who uses it. That might help you too.
That's great. Would you do that? Maybe, and then
Yeah.
you have my email contact. You can just shoot it back to me, and then I can provide that to everybody once we
Yeah,
get.
and I do live. All three of my kids are celiac, diagnosed with celiac. So I understand it. I understand food allergens. Understand the importance of food labeling.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think I can stop the recording.
Fantastic. Yep.